One could argue that if Elira had simply kept her mouth shut that night in the rushlight, the Alpha King would never have lost the one thing he ever truly wanted. But then again, if the man had ever once climbed down from his high seat to look at what his own kingdom was doing to the people underneath it, she'd have had nothing to say in the first place. So, really, when you follow the thread all the way back to where it starts, the fault was his. Every knot of it, every last tear she would one day cry on the cold North Road, belonged to him and to no one else. He simply had the good fortune, that night, of not yet knowing it. Elira Voss was not a drinker. As second to the huntmaster of Caldmere, she'd built a whole life out of being the sober one, the one who counted the packs in and out of the outmarches, who walked the others home when the ale ran ahead of their good sense. But grief is a different beast than celebration, and the rushlight that night was thick with it. They had put 9 into the frozen ground that week, all of them from the border village of Thornhollow, 9, in a kingdom that liked to call itself the richest in the north, and somewhere between the first cup and the cup, she stopped counting. The low tavern went soft and gold at its edges, and the careful woman who never spoke out of turn found herself on a bench, speaking very much out of turn. "I could keep this kingdom fed better than the king himself," she declared, "on his worst day and my best." The table roared. Someone banged a tankard hard enough to slop ale across the boards. "To the warden we deserve," howled Pell, the youngest of her rangers, and the rest drank to it gladly. "I mean it." Elira set her cup down with the exaggerated care of a woman who knew she was swaying. "The winter relief. 40 wagons of grain leave the capital for the outmarches. You know how many reach Thornhollow? 11. 11. And the king sits in Duncarrow wondering why his border folk keep dying with empty bellies in a full storehouse year." "Sounds like rotten luck," said Kessa dryly, dealing another hand. "It isn't luck, it's theft." The ale had well and truly taken the reins now. Wagons don't misplace themselves. Someone up the chain is bleeding the relief dry and selling it back to the very villages it was meant to save, and the man in the crown is too busy admiring his own banquets to smell the rot rising up through his own floor. Strong words. The voice came dry and amused from the shadowed seat beside her. She hadn't marked him sitting down. A traveler hood up despite the fugue of the room, an untouched cup of black ale cradled in one still hand. "Not strong," Elira said. "True. A king ought to know what happens in his own house." This one couldn't find the north road with both hands and a lantern. To stranger's mouth, all she could see of him curved. "The king is young," he offered, "newly come to the seat. Perhaps no one has told him that grain wagons are in the habit of sprouting legs. Then no one's doing their work, him least of all." She jabbed a finger at the table. "He's the king. Not knowing is the one thing he isn't permitted to be." "And you'd say as much to his face?" Elira thumped the boards. "I'd say a great deal worse to his face." The tavern whooped, and the approval went to her head quicker than the drink had. Has he ever gone to sleep hungry because the wagon never came? Ever had to look a Thornhollow widow in the eye and tell her the relief's been delayed again? He doesn't know how the rest of us live, and hasn't the decency to want to. A ragged cheer. Pell slapped the table. Then the stranger reached up, unhurried, and pushed back the hood. Elira's very first thought, drunk, instant and thoroughly disloyal, was that it wasn't fair for a man to look like that. Because the face beneath the hood was one she knew, from every coin she counted and the great grim portrait in the huntmaster's hall. The painters had caught the dark hair and the hard jaw. What none of them had managed was the rest of him, the easy, unbothered weight of a wolf who had never once had to raise his voice to be obeyed, and a pair of gray eyes, far too sharp for the lazy smile they sat above. "Severin," he said pleasantly, as though they were being introduced at a feast. "King of Caldmere. And you are." The laughter drained from the room the way heat leaves a body in the snow. Pell found his voice first, strangled to a whisper. "Your Grace," he breathed, and bowed so fast he nearly went over. Somewhere, far beneath the ale, the wolf in Alira understood that she ought to stop talking now. The ale had other ideas entirely. "Huh," she said. "You're taller than the portraits, am I?" The king's brow rose. "I'll have the painters whipped." "You truly believe," he went on, and the amusement never left his voice, "that you could teach me something about running my own kingdom? I believe you haven't the faintest idea what it costs the rest of us to keep it standing." The words came steadier than she felt. "Give me the run of the North for a season, and I'd feed every soul in the outmarches on what you waste, and you can't manage it with a full treasury." A bold claim. He leaned in, close enough that she caught the cold iron scent of a true alpha under the road dust. He said it like a dare laid gently on the table. "Prove it, then. Come and be my warden of the North. In truth, at my side, under my seal, bound to the crown where I can't pretend I didn't hear you. If you're so certain I'm the fool, then bind yourself to me and show me." A test, Alira thought, with enormous satisfaction. He expected her to go scarlet and take it all back, the way everyone folded the moment a king lifted an eyebrow. Well, he'd picked the wrong grieving woman on the wrong black night. Done. She thumped the bench. "I dare you. Bind yourself to me and come north and freeze in the mud with the rest of us. Go on. I dare you to actually look for once in your gilded life." If the rushlight had gone quiet before, it was a tomb now. The king blinked. Alira blinked back. For one long moment, they simply looked at one another, and Alira, certain she'd finally said the one thing that could shut a king's mouth, lifted her chin in triumph. "Well," she said, proud as anything, "what'll it be?" "Your Grace, have we got ourselves a bargain?" His lips parted. The whole room leaned in with her. A chair creaked. Someone forgot how to breathe. She watched the first word begin to shape itself on his mouth, and the front door of the rushlight exploded, inward off its hinges. "Curfew," a voice bellowed, and the city watch came through the breach in a black tide, cudgels swinging, overturning tables, hauling drinkers up by their collars. The lower city had been under curfew since the bread riots, and the rushlight had run 3 hours past the bell. Someone screamed. A lantern shattered. Kessa's hand closed hard around Alira's wrist and yanked her down off the bench into the churning dark. And the last she saw of the King of Caldmere was his mouth still open around an answer she would never ever hear. Alira woke to the certainty that she had died in the night, and that death was unreasonably bright. She was, against all odds, in her own bunk in the ranger barracks. She had made it home. She had no memory whatsoever of how. The night came back to her in shards that refused to fit together. The warm gold of the tavern, a hand of cards, laughter, a black door coming off its hinges. And she turned the pieces over, got nothing useful from them, and filed the whole thing away under too much ale. There had been a man, she thought. A low voice, amused at her, gray eyes. It was the last pleasant thing she would feel for a good long while. "She lives," said Kessa from the doorway, arms folded, unimpressed. Alira's voice came out as gravel. "Big night." That was Pell, behind Kessa, careful as a man crossing river ice. "Fine." She dragged a hand down her face. "I drank too much. It won't happen again." The admission cost her something. She was the one who stayed sharp while others didn't, who saw people safely home. She braced for them to mock her mercilessly for it, but nobody laughed. Instead, Kessa and Pell traded a look, and it was that look, not the headache, not the shame, that made the first cold finger of dread trail down her spine. "What?" Alira said. "What is that look?" Kessa crouched to her level. "You really don't remember." "I remember enough to be ashamed of. That's the end of it." "It's really not," said Pell, and then, with a forced brightness that fooled no one, "But it'll be fine." He's not going to take a word from a drunk ranger seriously. Best case, you just lose the post. Probably. "Pell," Kessa hissed. Alira looked between them. the dread widening into a pit. What is everyone talking about? Kessa sighed. The sigh of a woman drawing a splinter. I don't know how to say this gently, so I won't. You climbed onto a bench in a full tavern and told King Severin to his face that he couldn't find the North Road with both hands and a lantern. The room tilted. The king. Elira repeated it dumbly, as though the words might mean something different if she said them herself. You're telling me the hooded man was His Grace in the flesh. Pell winced. Among other things you said, that one was fairly mild. She wanted to protest. She opened her mouth to protest. And then, her own flat, drunken voice came back to her. Plain as a struck bell, a king ought to know what happens in his own house. And it dragged the rest up out of the dark with it. The hood pushed back by an unhurried hand. The hard jaw, the gray eyes. And underneath all of it, a bargain, a dare, her own hand thumping the bench. No, she said, to the memory more than to Kessa. She had called the most powerful alpha in the north a fool to his face, and thought that was the floor, until the rest came back. She had dared him, a border-born ranger, daring the king of Caldmere to bind himself to her before a room full of witnesses. And the very worst of it was that she had no idea how he'd answered. Had he laughed? Gone cold. There was only the door coming off its hinges, and then nothing. Ally. Pell started. Don't. She was already sitting up, the world lurching. Don't make it kind. He can't let it stand. A king who lets a drunk ranger mock him in public and walk away only invites the next mockery, and the next he'll answer it. The only question is how badly, and it could be very bad indeed. She kept telling herself the worst of it would be losing the post, and kept failing to believe her own comfort. He could take her head for it, and not one soul in the realm could raise a word against him. And even if he let her live, so what? She'd lose the only life she had. She'd been a ranger since Halvard pulled her half-starved off the famine roads at 13, one of the few from her whole village who hadn't gone into the ground with the others. Her brother Tam had carved her a little bone whistle that last winter before the hunger took him, so she could always call the pack home. She still wore it on a cord at her throat, the one thing she had left of where she came from. Being a ranger was the only thing she'd ever learned to be. There was nothing else for her, and never had been. By the time the door at the end of the barracks banged open, she felt sick to her stomach with it. Voss. A messenger, breathless. The huntmaster wants you. Now. Pell's hopeful look folded itself quietly away. A summons from Huntmaster Halvard at this hour. In that tone, Elira got up. She got dressed. She was afraid the whole long walk to his lodge, because it was obvious the king couldn't let it pass. And Halvard, who had believed in her when no one else bothered to look twice at a starving border girl, would be the one made to answer for what his ranger had done. She had repaid the only man who ever saved her by becoming the joke of the capital. She raised her hand to knock. That was when the great bell over the lodge gate began to ring, the deep, slow toll that meant an arrival, an official one, cleared by no one, announced by no one. Halvard's door was already opening. His weathered face came up, and it had gone the color of old ash. That's the gate, he said, very low. No one cleared a visitor with me. His frown cut deep. Whatever was coming had gone clean over the head of the Huntmaster of Caldmere, and there was exactly one person in the whole of the realm who could do that. Elira's heart dropped straight through the floor. Beneath the second toll of the bell, coming up through the stone under her boots, she heard it. Footsteps, not the tramp of a detail sent to make an arrest. One man, unhurried, easy, coming this way. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The king wasn't coming. The king was here. The door opened, and the king of all Caldmere walked into the cramped gray lodge, and the whole room changed shape around him. Elira felt it before she'd fully turned. The air pulling taut the way it does around a true alpha, her own wolf rising to attention beneath her skin. The hooded man in the tavern had let her forget he was the king. Let her stand on a bench and bark at him like any other traveler. This man let no one forget anything. He filled the doorway and then the room, broad through the shoulders and entirely unhurried, and she noted with fury, even harder to look away from sober than drunk. What she hadn't braced for was the weight of him, the effortless certainty of a wolf who had simply never needed to raise his voice. Drunk, she'd called him a fool who couldn't find a road. Standing here in the cold morning light, stone sober, she understood that she had been very, very stupid. Ah! The king's gray gaze found her and warmed with something that looked horribly like delight. There she is, my warden. Elira froze. He hadn't come for an arrest. He'd come for sport, to toy with her before he broke her. Your Grace. Halvard was already moving, putting himself half a step in front of her, spine bowed just enough. Forgive us. My ranger was gravely in her cups last night, which I take upon myself. If discipline is owed, let it be mine to give, and let it be quiet. The king listened with his head tilted, and Elira had the strange, needling sense that he wasn't only hearing the words, but weighing them, weighing Halvard, behind that easy smile. Then the smile widened. Discipline, he repeated, as though tasting the word. Huntmaster, I do hope you don't mean to discipline my intended yourself. I should take it rather personally. A beat of pure, ringing silence. Your Grace. Halvard's voice had gone careful. Please don't jest. Voss is a good ranger. Oh, she's better than good. She's to be my warden of the north, and my wife besides. The gray eyes cut to Elira, bright with mischief. She asked me, you understand, stood upon a bench and dared me to bind myself to her before a room full of witnesses. Isn't that so, sweetling? A binding dare, freely spoken, freely met. There are men in this hall who heard me answer. He spread his hands, all wounded innocence. I said yes. The floor went out from under her a second time in as many days. Her voice, which had held steady through blizzards and boundary skirmishes, and one memorable knife between the ribs, abandoned her utterly. Your Grace, I can't have. You did, he said, beaming. Right before you informed me I was taller than the portraits, and then, I'm sorry to report, were quite thoroughly sick in the doorway. The heat that climbed her throat went straight to the roots of her hair, because she remembered that the cold air, the black door, her own stomach turning, she remembered it now with dreadful clarity. You cannot mean to actually marry the girl, Halvard said, faint. And why not? The king's hand flew to his chest as though wounded. She dared me. I accepted. A king's word before witnesses is a king's word. Huntmaster, I can hardly go about taking it back, can I? What sort of realm would that be? He turned back to Elira, and for just a heartbeat, under the performance, something in his eyes was not laughing at all. No take-backs, Warden. Not for me, not for you. And there it was, the thing that made no sense. Because Elira knew with a certainty that startled her that there was no bond between them. She would feel it, some tug behind the ribs. There was nothing there but the pressure of a powerful alpha in a small room. He knew it too. She'd have staked her life on it. And here he stood, before her captain, inventing a betrothal out of nothing at all. Why? The question landed and would not leave. Deny the whole thing, and she was just a drunk ranger who belonged in a cell, or worse. Allow it, and a hanging offense turned into a fairy tale. The king had handed her the one story that could save her neck. The only trouble was that she couldn't for her life understand why he'd want to. As you say, Majesty, Halvard said at last, defeated, and bowed his head. But Elira, watching him the way she'd been trained to watch a tree line, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, saw, for just an instant, something flicker behind her mentor's steady eyes that she had no name for and did not like. The king clapped his hands together. Now, might I beg a moment alone with my bride? Halvard had no choice, and he knew it. He bowed, and he went. and the latch clicked, and Alira was alone with the King of Caldmere. "Your Grace," she began at once low and fast, "last night, I was far past all sense. I insulted you, and what I did after I've no excuse for. Whatever the Huntmaster sees fit to give me, I'll take it and be grateful. There's no need to drag the crown into a farce over one drunk woman's foolishness." Severin dropped into the lodge's one good chair as though he owned it, which he did. "You're terribly serious in the mornings," he observed. "Your Grace." "Please." He watched her a moment, and the slow smile came back, but there was something underneath it. Now, patient, watchful, harder to read than the man in the tavern. "Tonight," he said, "I'll send someone to bring you up to the hold. We'll sup, you and I, wear what you like, though I'm told it's customary to make some small effort." He rose, pausing at the threshold. "You will come, Warden. I'd send half the watch to fetch you, and it would be far less dignified for us both." A pause. "There's a thing I mean to ask you, and I'd sooner you were sober when I do." He winked. And then he was gone, and the careful apology she'd built the whole walk over was still sitting in her mouth, with nowhere left to go. Supper was laid in a small warm room, high in the hold, and Alira sat in it like a prisoner, awaiting the reading of her sentence. She'd worn the plainest good tunic she owned, and scrubbed the barracks off her hands, and still felt like a wolfhound seated at a banquet. When Severin came in, his gray eyes found her across the room, and something in them made her pulse kick stupidly at the base of her throat, which only made her angrier. "Well now." He surveyed her the way a man surveys a board. "He already knows he's won. Gray suits you. It's very nearly warm of you, Warden, to have dressed for me at all. You mock me, Your Grace." "Now why?" he said, drawing out a chair. "Would I ever do a thing like that?" He lifted a jug and raised a brow. "Cider?" The very thought of drink turned her stomach, and he saw it and laughed, not unkindly. "No. I'd hate for you to be sick on me twice inside a week. It would start to look like a habit." "Your Grace." She set her hands flat on the table. "Why am I here?" He blinked, all innocence. "To eat. You can't truly mean to marry me." She made herself hold his eyes. "I'm a ranger. I'm border-born. I've got dirt under my nails that won't come out and a temper that plainly won't either, and none of it makes the smallest sense next to a crown. So why am I here?" For a moment he set his chin on his hand and regarded her with an expression of wounded patience. "You asked me to come and see how the rest of the kingdom lives," he said, "to learn what want actually is. Perhaps this is me beginning." "And how are you learning the first thing about want?" Alira said, being fed roast pheasant off a silver plate. The words were out before her sense could catch them. "Forgive me, Your Grace. But if you've the leisure to wine and dine every woman you fancy making a joke of, I don't think you've the faintest idea what hardship is." She braced for the cold to come down. Instead, Severin set his knife across his plate and looked at her, and the mischief had gone quiet in his face. What was left was steady and direct, and far more unsettling. "You're right," he said. She gaped. "I am? I've never once stood where you stand." He pushed the plate aside. "So, show me. Take me down and show me your side of it, and we'll find out together whether it's as simple as I've always been allowed to believe." "Your Grace, you don't have to. I want to," he said, and there was no jest in it at all. So she showed him. She had meant to march him through it like an inspection. Cold, correct, keep the distance. But the moment she stepped into the tally house down in the granary yard, something in her chest loosened that the fine room upstairs had been slowly strangling all night. This was hers. This she knew. 40 wagons of winter relief logged out of Duncaro, she said, running her finger down the great manifest book. Signed, sealed, sent north. Now look, she flipped forward. Received at Thornhollow, 11, same the months before. Same with the salt, the lamp oil, the seed corn meant to put next year's crop in the ground. Every month a little more falls off the wagon between here and there, and every month It's the same villages that starve for it. Severin bent over the book, and to her surprise, he did not offer a single royal platitude. Where does the rest go? That is the question, isn't it? She moved down the row of letters. The huntmaster flags it. It goes up the chain, and up there it dies. No one who sits above the yard has ever once cared how a border village actually eats. Show me the last 4 manifests, side by side. She blinked. What? The manifests. He held out his hand, expectant. You said, show me. I'm being shown. There was something almost boyish in it. The eagerness, like a man handed a puzzle he genuinely wanted to solve. She pulled the books and laid them out, and when his thumb stopped on the 3rd page, she couldn't help herself. No, there. She leaned in. The Greywater double load. 2 wagons ordered where one would do, because the order came down twice under 2 different seals, and nobody cancelled the first. He looked up, and she realized she'd stepped in close, was nearly shoulder to shoulder with him over the page. She cleared her throat and did not step back. So cancel it, he said. I'm second to the huntmaster. I flag it. I don't have the authority to. You have it now. He straightened. Consider that my royal leave. Warden, cancel any order in these books that's bleeding the north for nothing. On my word. She stared at him. You can't possibly mean that. Of course I do. He reached past her for the manifest again, and she felt the brush of his sleeve along her arm. He's doing that on purpose, and then saw that he wasn't even looking at her. He was reading the page, frowning. A man learning something he didn't like, and something warm and dangerous unfurled behind her ribs, where she had no business feeling anything at all. Who signs the 2nd seal? He asked quietly, not looking up. When the huntmaster's away, whoever's nearest the seal box, and feeling important, it came out dry. He laughed. A real one, surprised out of him, and she felt the answering pull at the corner of her own mouth. They crossed the granary yard in the dark, and Alira heard it first, a scrape, stone on leather, off to the left, where the shadows piled thick beneath the grain hoists. She stopped walking. Problem, said Severine, quiet. Her eyes swept the black. She knew this yard. She had walked it 100 nights, and something in it was wrong. A shape by the hoist post that had no business being a shape at all. It moved. She let her breath out slow. A rat. Maybe. A cat. You've gone all stiff, Severin said, far too loudly. Is this the part where you confess you find me? She grabbed a fistful of his coat and hauled him sideways. A throwing blade hissed through the space where his throat had been and buried itself in the hoist post with a wet chalk. Was that meant for me? Severin observed, or for the post behind me? Stay at the wall. She shoved him back against the cold stone and put herself in front of him, and her long knife was already in her hand. Don't move, so I can see what's coming. I'm sure it's nothing. Some recruit lost his grip in the dark. Hush. Footsteps. More than one set, fanning wide. They came out of the dark all at once. 4 of them, faces wrapped, blades bare. Nobody wraps his face, she thought, cold and clear, unless he means to still have it in the morning. The first came fast. She caught his blade, turned it, and put her elbow through his jaw. The second, she took at the knee, and he went down hard. She got her brother's bone whistle to her lips and blew 3 sharp notes, and from the wall above came the answering horn of the watch. The remaining 2 broke off as one, not panicking, not scattering. A clean, disciplined retreat, back into the dark the way they'd come. Silence crashed down. Alira held her crouch, knife up, scanning, her own pulse loud in her ears. Well, said Severin from the wall, brushing green dust off his sleeve. You do know how to show a man a memorable evening. She turned on him. You're not even surprised. Someone just put a blade a hand's breadth from your throat, and you were expecting this. For half a heartbeat, something real flickered behind his eyes. Then the mask slid smoothly back over it. You're bleeding, he said gently, though she wasn't. Let's see you home, Warden. But she was already fitting it together. The disciplined retreat, the rapt faces, a king who cracked jokes with a knife in the air. And under it, colder, 3 villages starving, while the wagons vanished, and now blades in the dark for the one man who'd started asking where they went. "This isn't the first time," she said slowly. "Is it?" He didn't answer. And that, she was learning, was how the King of Caldmere told the truth. For the better part of a month, Elira set herself to working out what the king was hiding. It was the only sensible response to a man who'd been ambushed in his own granary yard and laughed it off with grain dust on his sleeve. Someone wanted Severin dead, she was certain now, and someone was bleeding the North White at the same time. And she couldn't believe those were 2 separate weathers. So she did what she was good at. She watched. She gathered sign, the way she'd track a wounded stag. A print here, a broken twig there. Patience. The king did not cooperate. She'd put a sharp question to him, and he'd answer with a joke. She'd press, and he'd flirt, sliding the whole conversation 3 topics sideways, so smoothly she wouldn't notice until she was well downstream of where she'd started. She cornered him once, on the ambush plainly, and he told her she was uncommonly beautiful when she was suspicious, and asked whether she'd always frowned like that or whether he was a special case. He gave her nothing she could use, and a great deal she had no idea what to do with, and yet the sign was there, if you knew how to read a trail. Twice that month, she watched him slip out of his own feast, through a servant's door and not come back for the better part of an hour. Once, on a raw gray dawn, she saw him at the postern gate in a plain cloak, speaking low with a hooded rider who wore no colors and carried no badge. And when the rider had gone, Severin stood a long moment with his palm flat against the gatepost as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. He kept a small black book that was not the manifest ledger, and he wrote in it when he believed no one was near, and he never ever left it lying about. Elira noted each of these things the way she'd note a set of prints crossing her path, filed, numbered, set aside, to wait for the animal that made them to show itself. She told herself she was building a case. Because the longer she watched him for danger, the more she simply found herself watching him. It crept up on her the way a fever does. The first gray morning he came down to the tally house, he leaned back against the doorframe, with the lamplight sliding down the long line of his throat, and she lost the thread of her own sentence clean in the middle of it. "You stopped," he said, smiling. "I'm thinking." She was not thinking. She was looking at his mouth, and she caught herself doing it and was furious, and it only got worse from there. He came up to the north wall at the cold dead middle of her watch one night, with 2 cups of mulled cider, steam ghosting off them in the frost. When he handed hers across, his bare fingers brushed the backs of hers, and her whole arm lit to the shoulder. She very nearly dropped the cup and covered it by glaring out at the dark. "You're not looking at the stars," he murmured. His voice did something to her, low and amused and meant only for her, this close, in the black. It went straight down her spine. "They're stars," she managed. "They're rather outshone tonight." He was looking at her openly, now taking his unhurried time about it, and Elira, who had stared down armed men in a dark yard without a flicker, couldn't hold his eyes for more than a breath before she looked away. He smiled into his cider like a man who'd won some small private wager and let her stew in it. That was the unbearable part. He was toying with her plainly, and she could never tell how much was a game and how much was real. Kessa noticed, of course. Kessa noticed everything. "You've gone soft in the eyes," she said one evening, honing a blade with a great deal more care than the blade required. "When he's about, you think nobody sees it?" "I'm watching him," Elira said. "It's my work to watch him." Kessa turned the edge to the lamp. "And who's watching you then, while you're so busy watching him?" Elira had no answer to that, which was answer enough. And Kessa let her keep the silence, which was somehow worse than if she'd laughed. And there was the other thing. The thing she turned over most often in the dark. There should have been a bond. He had named her his mate before her own captain, sworn it was fate that had put her on that bench. And a true mate bond was not a thing a man could counterfeit. She would had a thread hooked behind the breastbone, a pull toward him, whether she willed it or not. Some nights she reached for it, the way you probe a sore tooth with your tongue, and found nothing there at all. Only the ordinary heavy weight of a powerful alpha in a room, and her own wanting, which was not the same thing, and which no bond had put in her. He had lied about the bond, she was nearly sure of it. And she was falling for him regardless, which made her either a fool or a liar in her own right, and she could not for her life decide which was the worst thing to be. She lay awake in her narrow bunk after the late watches, sleep nowhere to be found, and her traitor mind went straight to him every time. The low voice, the gray eyes, the unbearable warmth of him she had no business thinking about at all. And underneath all of it, the thing that frightened her most, she had stopped, somewhere in those long blurred weeks, wanting him to go away. It came to a head late one night in the tally house. He came in and sat on the bench across from her, the way he'd done it 100 times. No papers under his arm, no question about the wagons, nothing at all she could file the visit under. Just Severin in the lamplight, watching her work. "What do you want?" she said. It came out raw. He didn't answer straight off. He looked at her, and for once there was no joke waiting behind his teeth. "Ask me plainly," he said, "and I'll tell you, plainly." The lamp guttered. Her heart was suddenly loud enough to drown the wind at the shutters. She realized, too late to stop it, that she was about to ask him a question she did not know how to survive the answer to. "No," Elira said, "I'm at the end of it." Her hands were not steady, and for once she didn't care. "Every day you won't say what you're after, and you won't leave me be. And I can't keep standing in this doorway, not knowing. Tell me it's a scheme. Tell me you need a blade you can trust, and a face at your side that won't ask questions. Tell me anything that makes sense, because I was not built to want a thing I can't have, and you are making me want." She stopped. Too late. The words were already in the room. "Want what?" Severin asked. Low. Not teasing now. Not anything but careful. "Don't." Her voice cracked down the middle. "You know what. You've known for days. You've been enjoying it." He came around the bench slowly, the way you approach a thing that might bolt for the trees. "And what if I told you," he said, "that I simply want you? No scheme under it. No use, I mean to put you to." He was close now, close enough that she had to tip her chin up to hold his eyes. "What if it were only that? Men like you don't want women like me." It came out a whisper, and she was staring at his mouth again, and she knew he could see it. "You don't believe me," he said it gently. "So tell me to go and I'll go, right now. I'll walk out of this yard and never trouble you again, and you can hate me in peace." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Or ask me to prove it." The tally house was very quiet. Her pulse was very loud. "Prove it," she heard herself say. He kissed her, and every careful, watchful thing in Elira's head went white and silent all at once. His hand slid into her hair, and his mouth was warm and certain and unhurried, and there was no audience for it. No bench of rangers, no bench at all. Only the two of them, and the low lamp and the sudden, total, overwhelming fact of him. And what undid her entirely was not the heat of it but the plainness. That he wanted her, simply and only her, for no reason on earth but herself. Elira had been wanted for her blade, for her watch, for her quick hands and her cold nerve. She had never once in her life stood in the path of a man's plain, unguarded caring, aimed at her, and it folded her resistance clean in half. She fisted her hand in his collar and kissed him back like she'd been thinking about it for a fortnight because she had. "Elira," he said, and his voice had gone ragged. She pulled back just far enough to find his eyes. They were dark, blown wide. "Be sure," he said. "If you're not sure, tell me now." "I'm sure." The lamp burned low and the frost thickened on the shutters, and for once in her careful life she stopped keeping watch. There was not one grain of strategy in it. No scheme, no clever move on a board he was winning. Only a man who wanted her, for the single reason that he wanted her. Whatever else passed between them in the quiet of the tally house belonged to the two of them and to no one else. And the little lamp burned itself gently out. God's help her, she wanted him back. Long afterward, they were still there in the dark, at the back of the tally house, her head resting over his heart, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. Elira listened to his heartbeat slow, and thought, with a kind of quiet terror, that she'd never in her life been anywhere she wanted less to leave. "You're thinking," Severin murmured into her hair. "I can hear it from here. I'm always thinking. It's one of the more alarming things about you." His fingers traced an idle line down her spine. "Go on, then. Tell me the thing I shan't like." She propped herself up to look at him. In the dark he looked younger and tired, in a way the daylight never let her see. "Why me?" she said. "And don't tell me it's fate because I don't feel the bond, Severin. I've reached for it. There's nothing there." She watched his face for the flinch and found only stillness. "So it isn't that, which means you chose this. You chose me, on purpose, for some reason you won't name. I, only, can't work out whether the reason is a kind one." For a moment he was quiet. Then he reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and his thumb lingered along the line of her jaw, and something crossed his face that she would spend a long time afterward trying and failing to name. "When a bond hasn't set yet," he said slowly, "it doesn't mean it isn't there. It only means it's still waiting. Some come on all at once, like a struck bell. And some grow so quietly, you never hear them at all. Not until the day you'd break yourself in half, trying to walk away." His gray eyes held hers. "You want a plainer answer than that. I know you do. And I'll give you one. I swear it on the crown. Only not tonight. Tonight, let me have this. You, just as you are. Nothing owed and nothing asked. Can you do that for me? Only the once?" It was not an answer. Every trained and watchful thing in her filed it away under the long and growing list of things the King of Caldmere would not say. And still she lay back down against his chest and shut her eyes and let him have it. Because the one truth she could not admit even to herself was that she had already, somewhere in the dark, set the ledger down and stopped keeping score. She should not have stopped keeping score. In the hard weeks to come, she would return to this night again and again. The single night she let the watch go slack, and understand it at last for exactly what it had been. The final easy breath she would ever draw before everything she'd built her heart upon came apart, all at once, in her two hands. But that was the weeks to come. Tonight there was only the low blue flame, and his heartbeat under her cheek, and the frost thickening on the shutters, and the two of them, warm, and briefly, and unbearably happy. Elira had stood guard at 100 feasts in her life. She had never once been a guest at one. And now here she was, in deep green wool cut finer than anything she'd ever owned, standing at the edge of the midwinter hall, while half the north drank and danced, feeling as exposed as if she'd come down in her small clothes. Across the room she caught Severin's eye, and he smiled. Slow, private, only for her, and some of the tightness under her ribs eased, despite everything. There was a stranger at the high table she did not know, a tall, silver-haired woman in white furs, with a hard, grief-worn face. "Queen Ingrid of the Viharn Reach," Severin murmured, following her look. "Our neighbor across the north border. She buried a good many of her own to the hunger this winter, same as Thornhollow did. We share that border, and the blame for it. And by spring, we're meant to share a treaty." His voice dropped. "So I'd take it very kindly if nothing at all went wrong tonight. You look devastating," he added, warm against her ear, and the fine hairs there rose. "I look like I'm playing at dress-up. You look like you're mine." His gray eyes were soft in a way they never were in daylight, and I am the luckiest wolf in the north for it. Heat climbed her throat. He took her out onto a gallery where the music thinned and the cold night air came off the snow, and for a while neither of them spoke. "You hate this," she said, watching his face. He was watching the dancers through the arch. "Eight is a strong word. You're lying." He laughed, surprised, real. "I am, aren't I?" And then the charming ease simply drained out of his face, and what was left underneath looked bone-tired. "I've been doing this since I was 19 years old," the smiling, the performing, being exactly the thing they need to see, so that none of them ever look too closely at what I'm not. He shook his head. "Some days I can't tell whether that makes me clever or only." He stopped, smiled again, but it had gone thin and defensive at the edges. She reached up and laid her hand along his jaw. His breath caught. The false smile came apart under her palm. "You're not what they think you are," she said quietly. "You're a great deal more than the performance. And the man underneath it." She paused. "I like him. I like him a very great deal." Something cracked wide open behind his eyes. "Elira," he said, rough, and then it happened. It was not the heat. She knew the heat by now. The wanting, the familiar low pull of him. This was something else entirely, pouring in through the place where her hand touched his face. Relief and terror and a fierce, aching tenderness, and under all of it, a loneliness so deep and so old it stole her breath. And it was not hers, it was his, distinct and clear and utterly foreign, flooding into her chest as though a door had blown open in a storm. The bond. Real and live and awake at last. Elira jerked back with a gasp. Severin's eyes had gone wide, his pupils blown. "You felt," he started. It was nothing. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "A chill. It's cold out here." He went very still. "A chill," he repeated. And she watched the hurt of it move across his face before the careful distance came down over it. Because she'd felt that too. Now she could not unfeel it. A servant appeared at the edge of the gallery, a silver tray on one flat palm. 2 cups of wine, dark as old blood in the moonlight. "Your Grace," the man murmured and offered the tray. Severin reached for a cup, and every instinct Elira owned stood straight up and screamed. She didn't think. Her hand shot out and struck the cup from his fingers. It shattered on the flagstones, wine spreading black across the ice. "Don't." Her hand closed hard around his wrist. She was already dropping into a crouch over the mess, her nose full of it, under the wine and the spice, a bitter green oily edge. "Wolfsbane," she said, "or something near enough to kill an alpha stone dead. This was meant for you." The color went out of Severin's face, and then, terribly it hardened. "You will tell no one," he said. She stared up at him. "What? Not Halvard? Not the watch? No one." His voice had gone quiet and calculating. "There's a foreign queen 40 feet away, who lost half a boarder to me this winter. If word gets out that someone tried to murder me under my own roof, at my own feast, I'll have a war before the snow melts." So we smile. We let them clear the glass and say, "A cup was dropped. Someone just tried to kill you, Elira." His hand came up to cover hers. "I need you to trust me. Just this once. I know what I'm doing," every trained thing in her said. But she could still feel the ghost of his fear against her skin, and so she heard herself say, "All right, I promise." Relief crossed his face. He pressed his mouth to her forehead, quick and grateful. And there it was again, that warmth pouring through the touch. And then he stepped back, and the mask slid neatly into place. The easy king with everything in hand. "I'll be back soon," he said. "Wait for me." She nodded, because her voice had stopped working. She gave him a 30 count. Then she followed. She kept to the edges the way she'd been trained, and watched him smile and deflect his way across the hall, and slip through a side door, and the instant he was out of sight, the smile fell clean off his face, her stomach dropped with it. She followed him down 2 flights of cold stone stairs, toward the huntmaster's office, and the door clicked shut behind him. For a moment she stood in the dark of the corridor and could not make her legs move. Then very quietly, She crossed to the door and opened it. Severin was behind Halvard's desk. The drawers hung open. There was a sheaf of the huntmaster's private papers in his hand. He looked up. He looked up. For a long, airless moment neither of them moved. "Alira," he said. His voice was very calm, very steady. "This is not what it looks like." Severin never paused. In all the weeks she'd known him, he'd always had the answer ready before she'd finished the question. But now he stood behind her captain's desk with a fist of stolen papers, and he paused. "Say something," she begged him. Without a word. His jaw tightened. "Someone put wolfsbane in your cup not 20 minutes ago," she said. "You told me to say nothing. And then you come straight down here, in the dark, to go through the huntmaster's private papers." Her throat had gone tight. "So, tell me plainly, Severin, what is going on?" Every instinct she owned screamed that something was wrong. And still, she held the door open behind her, a way out. Because, not 2 hours past, she'd touched his face and felt his whole heart pour into her, and she did not want this to be the thing it so plainly was. "I've been investigating Halvard," he said. The words wouldn't resolve into sense. They were only sounds. "Your huntmaster." His voice had gone quiet and terribly gentle, the smooth, careful one he used on grieving queens and frightened lords, the one he'd not used on her in weeks. He was using it on her now, the relief that never arrives. The contradictory orders, the wagons that vanish between here and Thorn Hollow. None of it is neglect, Alira. All of it is deliberate. The coin meant to feed the north, bled out and sold on, the silver run up into House Dren. And every man who's tried to kill me has been carrying Dren's coin in his purse. The floor went out from under her. "No," she said. He came around the desk toward her. "Not fast. Careful, Alira." She stepped back, and he stopped at once. "Not Halvard." Her voice had gone strange. "You don't know him. He pulled me off the famine road when I was 13. Half my village went into the ground that winter, and I would have too, and he— No, not him. I didn't want it to be him either. For a long while I wouldn't let myself believe it." He said it wearily, an old argument he'd lost with himself. The rider at the postern, that gray morning, no colors, no badge. "You remember? You notice everything. It's what makes you dangerous. He's mine. A factor of House Dren, who found he liked his own neck better than Dren's silver, and who's been feeding me the shape of this for half a year. Every wagon, every forged seal, every purse that ever bought a blade for my back, I set it all down myself, in a book I never let out of my own hand, because there wasn't a soul in this fortress I dared trust to carry it." His mouth thinned. "Least of all the huntmaster of my own guard, the Black Book, the postern rider." Every quiet strangeness she'd catalogued as suspicion had only ever been a man doing in the dark the very thing she'd accused his whole office of never doing in the light. Looking. Actually looking. "You needed someone close to him," she heard herself say from very far away. Someone he trusted, without question. The cold understanding was assembling itself, piece by piece, whether she willed it or not. "That's why you said yes on the bench, isn't it? You'd been hunting for a way in under his guard for months, and a drunk fool stood up on a chair and dared you, and handed you the perfect one." He said nothing. He held her eyes and did not deny it. "Say, I'm wrong?" Her voice cracked. "Severin, say, I'm wrong." He looked at her for a long moment, and he did not say she was wrong. She pressed the heels of her hands to her eyes. She'd been so stupid. He'd kept asking. The wagons, the seals, who signed when Halvard was away. And she had thought it was interest. She had thought it was her. "There's one more thing," he said very low, "and you'll hate me worst for it. Do you know why I trusted you from the first? Why I cleared you before I'd cleared anyone in this whole rotten fortress?" He didn't wait. "Because you were drunk that night in the rushlight. And drunk people don't dissemble. They just say the true thing. And the true thing You stood on a bench and said, was that everything wrong with this kingdom was my fault. Half my court believes exactly that. Not one of them would ever say it to my face. His mouth twisted. You did. That's how I knew you were no part of the rot. She opened her mouth. Nothing came. So, I'll ask you now. He said, gentler still, and it was worse for the gentleness. That night, the wagons, the theft, the neglect, all of it laid at the king's door. Was that your thought, Alira? Or was it something the good huntmaster helped you to see, across how many long nights, over how many years? And she could hear it. Halvard, hunched over the manifest books at midnight, grinding his teeth. The king's too busy with his banquets to notice. A king ought to know what happens in his own house. Her words in the tavern, his words first. She had carried the man's grievances around in her own mouth for a decade and never once noticed they weren't hers. You should have told me, she said, shaking. You knew I was clean. You watched me put my own body between you and a blade, and in all of it you never once told me the truth. Why not me, Severin? He looked at her, and when the answer came, it was barely a breath. Because I didn't think you'd believe me. I didn't think you'd trust me enough to turn on the man who raised you. A pause, and I was right, wasn't I? It landed like a slap, because it wasn't wrong. An hour ago, she'd have staked her own life on Halvard's honesty and counted it no gamble at all, and Severin had seen that in her, and weighed it, and judged her love for the old man too great a risk to trust with the truth. He hadn't been cruel about it. That was nearly the worst of it. He'd simply been right, the way he was right about everything, 3 moves before anyone else saw the board. So instead, she reached past it, to the older wound. That first night at supper, she said, I told you men like you don't see women like me as anything but useful, and you sat there and let me believe I had it wrong. The tears spilled, and she let them come. It was a fine piece of kingcraft, Severin, the dare that came free with a drunk woman's grief, the bride who'd never think to look at her own captain, the blade that threw herself between you and the dark and never asked why. I'd have admired it, in anyone but the man I. She stopped. She would not give him the word. Good night, your grace, and she walked out into the dark of the corridor. It was all a lie. She pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes until she saw sparks. Gods, she'd been a fool. A Lyra. The voice came out of the dark of the corridor like a thrown line. Halvard stood 10 paces off, just standing there, as though he'd been waiting for her, and before she could think better of it, she was already moving toward him, because he had pulled her out of the dirt when she was 13, and made her into someone who could stand on her own 2 feet. Except she wasn't standing very well just now, Illyra. His hands came down on her shoulders. What's happened? You're white as bone, and because it hurt too much to hold, she told him. It was a lie, Huntmaster. Severin never wanted her. He'd used her. She was only ever a way in. Halvard's weathered face softened. I know, he said gently. I'd hoped to spare you it. I'm sorry, girl. She thought he'd probably known from the very first night. They'd all known. Everyone but her. You were always too good for their games. Girl. His thumb moved along her shoulder slow. The old comforting gesture from 100 bad nights. That's what I could never make the fine folk upstairs understand about you. You give a boarder child a warm bunk and a purpose, and she'll bleed herself dry for the hand that gave it, and never once ask whether the hand deserves her. It's your best quality, it's why I've kept you close all these years. He said it as though it were tenderness, and it's exactly what he saw in you, and used a loyal blade that doesn't ask questions. Same as I, he stopped himself and smiled, sad and warm, same as any commander would treasure. She barely heard the slip. Grief had made her stupid and slow, and he knew it, and he was counting on it. But it's worse than that, Illyra, Halvard went on, low, and there's no soft way to say it. The Queen's young brother, her envoy, is dead. Tonight, this very evening, his jaw hardened. They'll tell you the fever took him. It didn't. Severine had him poisoned, wolfsbane, dressed up to look like the fever, so the blame would never come home. The boy stood between Caldmere and a treaty the king couldn't stomach paying for, and a dead brother makes a grieving sister sign what a living one would haggle over. I saw it done, not an hour past, with my own eyes. A king who'd murder a guest under his own roof isn't fit to keep the roof. Alira stared at him, trying to make the pieces fit together into any shape at all. There are good houses ready to steady the realm once he's fallen, Halvard said. House Dren among them, but it can't come from me. I'm only a huntmaster. They'll say I grabbed for power. It has to come from someone the queen will believe, without a breath of doubt. His voice went soft, almost kind. It has to come from you, the king's own intended. If you tell Queen Ingrid you saw Severin's hand in her brother's death, no soul in that room will question a word of it, and for one hollow, grieving heartbeat, she almost believed him. She was hurt enough to want to. Then the tracker in her, cold and patient, and never quite asleep, caught the thing that didn't fit. Not an hour passed. She turned the words over, the way she'd read a churned patch of ground, and the ground would not lie the way the man was lying. An hour passed. Severin had been on the gallery with her, then in the crowded hall under 500 eyes, then bent over Halvard's drawers in the dark. There had been no hour in which he could have gone near the envoy. And the wolfsbane tonight had been poured for Severin's cup, not the boy's. She'd smelled the bitter green of it herself, struck it to the flagstones with her own hand. Poison didn't get carried to a man, and used against him in the same night, by the same hand. That wasn't how any of it worked. The timeline was wrong. The poison pointed the wrong way. And a story, that wrong in the mouth of a man, that calm, was not a mistake. It was a lie, built careful and told smooth. And she had tracked enough frightened things across enough hard country to know the difference between a man who was grieving and a man who was managing her. Halvard was lying. The man who'd pulled her out of the dirt was lying to her face, this instant, with his hands warm and steady on her shoulders, which meant every terrible thing Severin had said in that little gray office was true. The stolen relief, the forged seals, the coin run up to House Dren, the blades in the dark, every one of them bought and sent by the man, now stroking her shoulder and calling her girl, her own people. The 9 in the frozen ground she'd helped to dig, her brother's whole short life, and its ending. Him. Not the careless boy king on his gilded seat, him. The one hand she had never thought to doubt, all of it, always, him. Her hand twitched toward her knife, old instinct. But no, not here, not now, not one woman in a dark quarter against the man who commanded every soldier in this fortress. Halvard expected her to be hurt, and furious, and desperate to believe the worst of the king who'd used her. So she gave him exactly that. "What do we do?" she asked, and let her face crumble. Halvard's eyes sharpened with satisfaction. "We go to the queen," he said, "before Severin can twist it first." He drew her arm through his, gently, the way he had when she was a half-starved girl who flinched at kindness. "Come, walk with me." It was the longest walk of her life. She had to get into that room and turn Halvard's trap back on the man who'd built it, and she had nothing to do it with but her own word. And one wrong word in front of a grieving foreign queen could put the whole north to the torch by morning. Queen Ingrid had taken a council room in the east wing, all cold gray stone, and one long table. Severin was already there when Alira came in behind Halvard, and when he saw her, his whole face lit for half a heartbeat, before he saw who she walked in beside, and the light went out of it as though a shutter had come down. "Your Grace." Halvard bowed low to the queen. "It grieves me past speaking to bring this to you, but your brother was wronged by the man at your right hand." And he laid it all out, smooth and sorrowful. The poison, the treaty Severin couldn't stomach. A guest murdered under a host's roof. "That is a lie," Severin said, "in every word, and all of it is his." "He would say that," Halvard replied, unruffled. "Of course he would." He turned, and the whole room turned with him, to Alira, silent by the door. But the king's own bride was under this roof tonight. It's plain to all of us that she loves him, that she has every reason under heaven to shield the man she's promised to. He extended one open hand toward her. So, ask her, your grace, Alira. Tell the queen what you saw. Every face in the room swung to her. Queen Ingrid, leaning forward, raw with a sister's grief and needing someone to lay it on, Halvard's 3 borrowed lords already counting her a friend. And Severin, who did not know she had turned, who believed she'd come in on the traitor's arm to help bury him, and who was looking at her now, the way a man looks at the blade going in. It would have been so easy. One word from her. Yes, I saw it. He did this. And the boy king who had used her would fall, and the man who'd made her would have his power, and no soul in the north would ever question the word of the king's grieving bride. Halvard had spent 13 years shaping her into precisely the instrument this moment needed, and had every right to expect it to work. He'd only ever made one mistake so long ago. He'd forgotten it was there, without once meaning to. He had also taught her to care more for the truth of a trail than for the man who pointed down it. I'm sorry, she told him, with no words at all. I should have believed you from the very first. I'm sorry it took me until now. Then she turned to the queen. I saw nothing of the kind, she said, because it never happened. Captain Halvard is lying to you, your grace, to your face, over your brother's body, and I can prove it. The room snapped tight as a drawn bowstring. Beside her, Halvard went rigid. He says your brother was killed within the hour, she went on. Steady, now. But within the hour, the king was at his own feast before 500 witnesses, and then, on the gallery, with me. He never went near your brother tonight, or any night, she faced Ingrid directly. And there have been 3 attempts on King Severin's life this season. There was wolfsbane in his wine. Not 2 hours ago, I struck the cup from his hand myself. The stain is still on the gallery stone, if you care to look. Her chin came up. Search the huntmaster's quarters now, while he stands here and can't reach them. See whether you find proof of a murdered envoy, or a paymaster's ledger to House Dren, and enough poison to drop an Alpha King. This is hysteria. Halvard's calm cracked at the edges, and Alira, who had watched him hold it through a prison riot and a wildfire and the burying of children, felt the cracking like the first give of lake ice underfoot. The girl is distraught. Look at her, half mad with weeping. The king used her and broke her heart not 2 hours past, and now she'll say whatever he needs. Your grace, you cannot hang a treaty on the ravings of a— Then a search costs you nothing, said Queen Ingrid quietly. The whole room went still. You have named my brother's murderer, the queen went on, rising. And she has named yours, and one of you is lying to me over my own blood, so we will look. If your quarters hold nothing but a soldier's kit, Huntmaster, you'll have my apology on my knees. And if they hold what she says— She did not finish it. She only nodded to her own guards, and they turned for the door. And Halvard's face changed. She would remember it for the rest of her life, that change, because it was the moment she lost him for good. Not in the tavern, not in the office, but here. The grave, patient, honest huntmaster she had loved and served and believed for 13 years, simply went out, like a lamp pinched dead between 2 fingers, and what stood in his place wearing his face was a cornered animal that had never once been anything else. He ran, not for the door. The guards had the door. He came straight at her, because she was the one who had done it, and she saw the thin knife slide from the seam of his sleeve half a beat before he reached her. Alira. Severin's voice raw with terror, but this was the one thing in the whole ruinous night that she knew exactly how to do. There was no grief in it and no love in it, and no thought at all, only 13 years of drill, dropping into her hands, clean as cold water. She turned into him instead of away, inside the arc of the blade, where it couldn't reach, caught the knife arm at the wrist, and used his own forward rush to fold him, face first onto the cold stone. The knife skittered across the flags. Her knee came down between his shoulders, and she had his wrist locked tight before he'd finished falling. He heaved once under her and went still. She leaned close to his ear, so only he would hear it. "You made me, Halvard," she said, very low. "Every drill, every long night. You taught these hands everything they know." Her voice did not shake. "You, of all the men alive, should have known better than to come at me with a blade." Then the Queen's guards had him, hauled him up off the floor, none too gently, and dragged him out of the room while he said nothing at all. And it was done. It came apart quickly after that, the way these things do once the first stone goes. Ingrid's people confirmed the truth of it within the hour. Her brother had died of a winter fever, and nothing crueler, no poison in him, and the alliance would hold into the spring. Halvard's 3 borrowed lords melted out of the room, already rehearsing the story in which they'd known nothing. And the search of his quarters turned up all of it, a paymaster's ledger in his own careful hand, a stoppered vial of the same green death, meant for Severin's cup, and at the bottom of a locked chest, a decade of the North's stolen bread reckoned out to the last measure, as though he'd wanted even from himself to keep an honest account of the dishonest thing. And then it was only the two of them in the cold gray room. Severin hadn't moved. He was staring at her as though he'd never once seen her before. "You saved my life," he said. "Even after everything You still." "I came to stop a traitor," Elira said, flat. "That's all it was." The light in his face flickered and struggled. "Elira, it's real. You felt it tonight. On the gallery, I know you did. It doesn't matter whether it's real," she said. And her voice was very quiet and very steady, and that was the most frightening thing about it. "It doesn't matter," she said again, "because a bond doesn't undo a single thing you did." "Elira," he took a step toward her, and this time, she didn't retreat, and somehow that was worse. It made him stop of his own accord. "I love you. I don't care how it began. I won't pretend the start of it was clean. It wasn't. And you know it wasn't. But somewhere in the middle, it stopped being a scheme and became the truest thing I've ever... Don't." She said it without heat, which was how he knew she meant it. "You looked me in the eye for weeks, Severin. You let me put my body between you and a blade. You let me into that cot at the back of the tally house. And in all of it, you never once trusted me with the truth." She drew a breath that shook only a little. "You can say, mate, like it's a key that opens every lock. It isn't. A bond doesn't buy back trust. It only means I'll feel the lack of you for the rest of my life, and go anyway." She felt what that did to him before she saw it. The bond carried it to her whole and unguarded, a stone dropping down a well with no bottom. He'd spent his life keeping every true thing off his face. He couldn't keep this one out of the space between them, and so she was made to feel, in her own chest, the exact weight of what she was breaking. Its own particular cruelty, hers to him and his to her, both at once, and no way left to close the door on either. He flinched at that. "I'm sorry," he said. I know you are. I believe you." And she did, which was the terrible part. She reached past the fresh wound then to the old one underneath. "He made me, 13 years teaching me the only thing I was good for was serving his guard and carrying his grudges in my mouth. My own village, starved on his theft. My brother went into the ground on it, and still I stood on a bench and blamed you for it in his words, because he'd poured himself into me, so young and so slow I never once heard the difference between his voice and my own." Her eyes were wet, but her voice held. "I have been a blade in 2 men's hands, my whole life. His, and then yours, and I can't do it a 3rd time. Severine, not even for you. Not even for a real one. I have to belong to myself for a while, or I don't think there'll be anything left of me to belong to anyone." For the first time since a black night in a tavern, she watched him have no answer ready. He who always had the next word before you'd finished your own, stood in the middle of that cold room with his clever mouth open and nothing clever behind it, because there was no argument to make, and he was clever enough to know there wasn't. "And it isn't only you," she said, quieter. "That's the worst of it. I think I could forgive you. In time, I can feel that I could, and it frightens me. But I can't stay and be the king's warden in the same hall, where my captain sold my village for silver, and sleep in the barracks he built for me, and carry the post he shaped me to fill, and call any of it mine. It was theirs, every bit of the woman standing here, one of them made and the other one used. I have to find out whether there's an Alira left underneath all of that, and I can't do it anywhere that already knows my name." "Then belong to yourself," he said quickly, desperately, reaching for the one thing he thought he could still win. "Stay and be your own, and I'll earn it. I'll spend every day of my life earning it. I'll ask you again tomorrow, and the day after, every day, until you believe me. I swear it." He caught himself, made his voice steadier, the voice of a man certain there would be a tomorrow to ask in. "Just don't go tonight. Sleep on it. Let me ask you again, when the worst has passed. Will you let me ask again?" And there it was. The mirror of a black night in a tavern, only turned all the way around. Once she had stood on a bench and dared him, certain of her ground, sure she'd finally won. Now he stood in a cold gray room and dared her to give him a tomorrow, just as certain, just as sure. And she understood, watching him, that he truly believed he would win this, the way he won everything, with time and patience, and that relentless charm, worn slowly into something real. He thought this was the first evening of a long courtship, that tomorrow he'd begin earning her back, and that some ordinary morning, far down the road, she would finally say yes. He had no idea that he was, at this very moment, already saying goodbye. It might have been more honest to tell him, but she could not stand in front of that hopeful, ruined face and say the word aloud and watch it land. And so she chose the mercy of letting him keep his tomorrow, even knowing it was a tomorrow that would never come. She looked at him for a long moment. She loved him. That was the plain and useless truth of it, and she could feel it running both ways down the live bond between them, his and hers, tangled past any hope of separating. "Ask me again tomorrow," she said softly. Relief broke over his face, so total it hurt to look at. He didn't hear what she heard under her own words. He kissed her forehead, quick and grateful, sure of his ground, and told her to rest, and that he'd come to her at first light, and she let him believe every word of it. Then she walked out, into the dark of the corridor, and the tears came, and she did not turn around. He watched her go, and he was already composing tomorrow's apology in his head. He did not know to say goodbye. It would be a long time before he understood that the last of her he would ever have was the sound of her boots fading on the stair, and a door, and the cold. In the end, Severin turned out to be a very good king. He cut the rot out clean. House Dren fell inside the month, its lands broken up, and its coin poured back into the north where it belonged. Halvard died in a cell beneath the old fort, and few mourned him. By the following winter the relief reached Thorn Hollow. Entire 40 wagons sent. 40 arrived, and no one in the outmarches went into the ground hungry, and the city that had never taken its boy king seriously began at last to love him. He waited for her the whole time. The morning after the reckoning, he'd gone to the ranger barracks at first light. With the apology, he'd stayed up all night polishing and found her bunk stripped and her ranger's cloak folded square at its foot. And on the desk in his own study, laid where he could not miss it, a small whistle carved from bone. He hadn't understood it at first. Kessa had, when he showed her. Kessa had gone very still and said that Elira's dead brother had carved that whistle for her, the last winter of the famine, and that Elira had worn it at her throat every day of the 13 years since, and would sooner have cut off her own hand than leave it behind. Unless she meant to leave everything behind. Even that, even the last of where she came from. The trackers followed her scent to the north postern, where it stopped at the open road and did not go on, the way a trail stops when someone knows exactly how to keep from being followed, and does not wish to be. Past the outmarches, past the last of the King's Reach, out into the free wild north, where no crown had ever run and no one had ever needed a king's leave to eat. He never saw her again. He kept the whistle on a cord at his own throat until the day he died, an old king by then, still unmarried, and he never once managed to explain to anyone's satisfaction why. So really, when you follow the whole thread back to where it starts, back to a black night, and a grieving woman on a bench, and a hooded fool too clever by half to simply tell the truth, the fault was his, every knot of it. Every last tear on the cold north road. He'd had the truest thing in all his kingdom, standing right in front of him, close enough to touch, and he'd spent it instead of keeping it. And by the time he understood the difference, she was already gone. He got to be a good king. He simply never got to say goodbye.